Hey, what's up? Pizza Loving Nerd here. I've been a GNOME user since around, I'd say, GNOME 3.32, and I haven't been able to get into any other desktop environment since I made the switch. I think the workflow is just that good. Until I randomly decided to ditch GNOME for no reason when I tried Debian 12, just to make the experience a little bit more fun. I don't know. What I didn't know at this time is that the Plasma developers have stated that the LTS release, the latest one, Plasma 5.27, will be the last release of Plasma before Plasma 6. So, let's see what Plasma does right and wrong. By default, on the majority of Plasma distros, when you first boot into Plasma, you'll get a very Windows 7-like UI. You'll have your start menu on the bottom left, which is beautifully laid out, and I just want to say, the new Plasma menu, well, new-ish, it's been there for a few releases now, but it's a lot better than back when I used to use Plasma with this garbage menu. Then next to it, there's a workspace switcher, which I personally think is a bit big on the panel, but whatever. And then you also have your taskbar icons, and then your system tray on the right. That's right, GNOME. Plasma is already 0 for 1, because it ships a system tray out of the box. Overall, pretty standard layout, but I am used to the GNOME workflow. This is a matter of personal preference. If you came from Windows, you wouldn't have any complaints. And then also, this is Plasma. You can change your desktop however you want, which leads me to layout customization. Just by right-clicking the desktop, I can enter edit mode, and then from here, I can just drag and drop the panel to whatever side of the screen I want it to be. Then, you can completely edit the widgets and completely change how you want it to feel. I personally put the panel on the top just because I have GNOME muscle memory, and speaking of GNOME muscle memory, inside of the system settings, I was able to set a hot corner to add a very GNOME-like overview, which lets me switch between my open windows and workspaces. This isn't as good as GNOME's normal overview because I can't launch new apps from it or do things like straight up drag and drop apps from my dock to a new workspace and just quickly get a bunch of programs open. But it's good enough for now until I switch back to GNOME, especially because Nico is working on a more GNOME-like overview for Plasma 6. Finally, I love how easy it is to switch between different widget alternatives on the taskbar. Like for something like the start menu, I can literally just right-click it, go to alternatives, and select a different menu, for example. It just makes customization even easier than it already is. Now, another thing Plasma does really well in the customization aspect is theming. It makes theming incredibly easy. On every other desktop environment, especially GNOME, theming can be a huge chore. Like first you have to download a GDK theme, and then an icon pack, and then a shell theme, and then a cursor theme. And then you have to install something like the GNOME tweak tool or shameless self-promotion, risiTweaks, just to change the theme. Then for libid Weta apps, you have to use something like gradients or shameless self-promo again, rtheme, in order to get your libid Weta apps themed properly, and this doesn't even cover things like GDM. Plasma, if I want a complete new look to my desktop, I just go to Get New Global Theme, find one I like, select it, and it downloads and installs everything for me, and I'm done. Another thing I really like how the application and Plasma themes are separate from the color theme, and so for the sake of consistency, I was able to use Breeze as the application theme just to make sure things work properly in all of my Qt apps, because KDE apps are made to use Breeze. But then I was able to set a custom color scheme on top of that completely changed the look of the desktop without risking my apps breaking due to not using Breeze. So overall, in the theming aspect, Plasma is by far the most well-executed implementation of theming I've ever used in a desktop. It's just so easy to do, and it works well. Finally, outside of customization, I would just like to mention that Plasma 5.27 on Nvidia has given me the best Wayland experience I've ever had on Nvidia. Fedora Workstation with GNOME, I would have random issues where random applications would just stutter and lag around and basically be unusable for me on Wayland with Nvidia. And this mainly happened with Electron apps, especially apps with older Electrons like Discord. However, on Plasma, I literally haven't had a single Wayland-related issue on Nvidia, and I am super impressed. And I think it's ironic because I remember a couple of years ago where I would have issues with Plasma compositing on Xorg, where if I opened a game, it would completely break compositing, and my whole desktop would be kind of broken until I logged out and logged back in. But that's fixed now. I'd like to thank the Steam Deck for that. And then it's also just ironic because GNOME is the one that is supposed to be ahead in Wayland. Like, they're kind of known for that. So it's just funny that Plasma's been a much better experience for me on Wayland. It seems like I am really liking KDE. So am I ready to make a switch to it? Not quite yet. There are still a few things that make me prefer GNOME over Plasma, although all of these issues are small enough where I can't objectively say that GNOME is better. It's just a matter of personal preference at this point. First thing I'd like to mention is visual bugs. I notice quite often random visual bugs throughout the desktop. Although none of these bugs have actually affected my use of Plasma, it's more of just like weird, funny, haha visual bugs that go away once I like move a window or something. Like, they're not annoying bugs, they're just kind of funny bugs. And while we're talking about Plasma and bugs, I'd like to mention that it is a hell of a less buggy than it was 2 or 3 years ago, where, again, I mentioned that opening game compositing issue, and then I also used to have a bug that occurred on multiple releases of Plasma, where I'd spend an hour customizing everything on the desktop to my likings, and then I'd restart my computer and it'd go back to default. That said, though, I also want to mention that my Plasma experience has been very inconsistent throughout distros. Again, I recently did a review of Debian 12, which ships with Plasma 5.27, and I was using that for 3 out of the 4 weeks of this Plasma review. And on Debian 12, I had a lot of random bugs on Plasma that actually were annoying and not just visual bugs. And initially, this review was just me, like, completely destroying Plasma for how buggy it was going to be. But then I decided to switch to Fedora Kinite, or Kinite, I don't know how to pronounce it, when I was done with my Debian review. And pretty much every major bug I had on Debian, aside from just the visual ones, completely went away. Like, on Debian, I'd have random crashes where the panel would just crash out of nowhere, and I couldn't get Wayland working on my Nvidia hardware at all. However, on Fedora, even with an immutable distro, I barely had any issues other than visual bugs. I literally had to rewrite this entire review because of how much more stable Plasma is on Fedora for me. If I knew Plasma was only buggy on Debian, I would have put that in my Debian review, but whatever, it's too late now. So I just want to say, if you were like me and you weren't using Plasma before it's too buggy, maybe try it again on another distro. Like, Fedora with KDE has been a really good experience for me, and just give it another shot on a distro that manages to package Plasma in a better way that makes it less buggy. Now for my last issue of Plasma is the apps. KDE has some really advanced apps that are actually amazing. For example, I've used Kdenlive to edit videos for years before I switched to DaVinci Resolve very recently for Tech Cut. And then Krita is another example of a very advanced app that the KDE team maintains. Outside of that, though, the KDE app ecosystem is nowhere near as developed as the GNOME ecosystem. And for the apps they do not have consistent design language in their apps, which can make things really confusing. They just don't feel like they have any polish or thought put into it at all. Just to prove my point, let's go onto the FlatHub website and go to the recently added apps, and you'll see tons of brand new GNOME apps, and then barely any KDE Plasma apps. There are even quite a few apps that use Qt, but just aren't KDE apps. Whereas it's a lot harder to find brand new GDK apps that aren't libidweta apps. And to me, the most frustrating part of the KDE app issue, in my opinion, is that KDE already has a solution to this problem that people just aren't using. This solution is Kirigami, a toolkit KDE made, which is basically KDE's version of libidweta, minus the removal of theming. But the point is that it allows you to make beautiful and consistent looking apps that fit into the KDE ecosystem. The problem is people aren't using it because people don't want to deal with Qt. Because I've tried developing Qt apps before. It's nowhere near as easy as it is to develop GDK apps, especially in languages like Python. People would rather use GDK or Electron, but it's just funny because instead of Electron, people can use Kirigami to make lighter apps that are native to KDE, but also Android, macOS, and Windows. The only thing they look out of place on with Kirigami is just GNOME. So I feel like the KDE community should just really stop adding features to Plasma, especially with the release of Plasma 6. Like, just make Plasma 6 a really, really polished release, and then focus a lot more on apps. That's kind of what GNOME has done at this point. Like, the new GNOME updates have barely been adding anything to the desktop. They've been very minor, and they've been putting a lot of effort on apps, and just the apps make GNOME a way better experience for me. However, if you're used to Windows, I can't say Microsoft's app consistency is that much better. So if you just aren't used to the amount of quality apps on something like GNOME or like a Mac or something, then this won't be an issue for you on Plasma. So overall, I think Plasma is actually a really well-made and mature desktop, and I think it's equal to quality compared to GNOME, and at this point, it's just personal preference on which one you should use. Like, if you aren't sure, just try out both of them for a while. If KDE is being buggy for you, try it on a different distro. I will say that GNOME is probably a little bit more consistent in the quality of packages across Linux distros compared to KDE. So if you're wanting to try out KDE, maybe try it on like an Arch-based distro or a Fedora-based distro. It's customizable, it's easy to theme. As much as I used to hate Plasma due to bugs, I actually like it a lot now. I will be switching back to GNOME, just personal preference, but if I was forced to use a Plasma system, I don't think I'd really care that much. I'd just use it. So that's my review. Thanks to my patron, Sam Covett, and I'll see you in the next video.